Today, I want to welcome Aron Phillips. He is an attorney and the founder of the law office of Aron Phillips, located in the Stockyards of Fort Worth, Texas. He advises business owners on entity formation, mergers and acquisitions, and commercial real estate. Today, he's joining us to share some practical advice on how to get the legal advice you need. Aron, welcome.
Hi, Craig. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So, one question I forgot to ask. Are you in Success Champions Networking? I know we were introduced by somebody in that, but I can't remember if
Yeah,
you
I,
are.
I've visited a few groups, but I'm not an official member, so I'm still hovering around.
Hover less. Come in. The the coffee's warm and the environment's right.
Yeah,
Um,
it definitely has a lot of good, friendly people. I appreciate what y'all are doing a lot, and I think it's got some good folks. So
yeah. No, and I was asking because I end up having a lot of folks on the podcast that I meet in SCN, and I was just trying to remember where you are. But when we first talked, and you told me that your law office was at the Stockyards. I'm like, I thought, oh, one of the side streets, or one of the streets outside the Stockyards. But you're in the Stockyards. There are
yeah,
cattle that go by your office.
yeah. My conference room looks out over East Exchange, and there's a cattle drive out front every day, and I have to plan meetings around that sometimes because clients can't get to my office very easily if it's during one of the cattle drives, which are twice a day every day. So,
Wow.
yeah, I'm right in the middle of it. Second floor. This building is over 100 years old and used to hold the janitor's closets are old safes that used to hold gold. And they used to have more gold in this building than anywhere, if I remember my history correct from the tour, than anywhere else in the world for about a decade because the North-South Railway from Canada to Mexico ran through here, and the East-West Railway from East to West Coast ran through here because the mountains aren't as tall on the southern end of the Rockies, so it's little easier to get through New Mexico and Arizona. And so this was the cross section. And if you wanted livestock, if you wanted horses, they all went by rail, and that all intersected here, and they had to hold the gold somewhere.
Yeah. That's wild. I certainly didn't know that. That's wild. Do you ever have any clients track into the office remnants from the cows?
No, they never tracking remnants for the cows, but yeah, their clients definitely appreciate coming down here. Like if we're doing a closing or something else, because then they can go just down the street and get a nice steak, or get some good Tex-Mex and a margarita and celebrate. So it's a fun atmosphere in terms of having plenty of good places to eat. And then I like it because it's not your average just go into an office, hit the elevator, go into an LED light room. It's got some character, and I enjoy that.
No, I think it's phenomenally cool. I mean, the whole Stockyards area is really neat, and I enjoy going there. Although last time I went there, there were some nutso drivers up there.
Yeah, some people don't. I mean, this is regular because it's tourists, so there's a lot of drivers that are driving through it for the first time. So they're either driving super slow or they try to go the wrong way. They don't realize that East Exchange is both lanes are going the same direction. Or this one's the most common because they don't realize that both lanes are going the same direction. Or maybe they do, but it's in the back of their head. They'll be in the right lane and they'll try to left turn out of the right lane and almost hit a car in the left lane.
Oh
That
wow.
probably happens daily. Now they don't hit usually, 99% of the time one of them stops in time. But yeah, that's those are pretty common occurrences just because it's their first time and then they might not come back forever. So
How many barbecues are at the Stockyard?
there's Riskies and Coopers, so two main ones.
What's your favorite one?
Between the two of them, I like Coopers. It's that pit style barbecue. I like saying I want this much brisket, this much of this and that. And then they usually give you a little more, and so you got plenty of meat.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Cooper's was the first barbecue I went to. I went to the one out in Llano. I've been to the one at the Stockyards, but that was the first time where I felt like I had a true barbecue experience here in Texas.
Yeah.
And it was, yeah, I love it. You just sit there and point at meat sitting in the smoker and they just big old fork, yank it out, cut it and yank it out.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they just load you up.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about law. What type of law do you practice?
So I focus primarily on business owners' needs. The reason that most people find me is they're starting a business, so they're starting an LLC, for example, or they're buying or selling a business, so they have some sort of merger and acquisition, or they've got a commercial real estate transaction, so they need a lease reviewed, a loan reviewed, or a purchase and sale agreement. So those are the main three kind of avenues that they find me. And then once they do, they'll usually use me as their general business counsel, and I'll review all kinds of agreements, whether it's master service agreements, vendor agreements, drafting an NDA for them for something, or some other situation. So I've reviewed a lot of different kinds of stuff, and sometimes just created things out of whole cloth because somebody needs something and it's kind of unique, and I figure out how to conceptualize that into a contract.
Yeah. One of the things that's been on my mind is having like nested LLCs. And the thing that always scares me is like I don't need to pay another CPA to do another expensive tax return every year.
Yeah.
But I think there's some times where it makes sense to have more than one LLC.
Yeah. Although it probably is the tax folks that are able to justify it because it ends up increasing your tax bill more than anything else. So, sometimes if you like I talked to somebody earlier this week, they have multiple properties that they're renting or flipping. So in that situation, it can make sense to have multiple LLCs and then one top level LLC. And what I'll see there is, and I'm not a CPA and I did not sleep at a Holiday Inn Express last night, but what I've heard in terms of the structure, in terms of why that makes sense, is you can have the lower level LLCs as disregarded entities that then roll up. And so you're just filing one tax return for the holding company. And then I like it as the attorney because you get the legal liability separation where each property or set of properties is separated from all the other ones. And so that is an advantage, I think. And so there are definitely situations where it makes sense if you have the rental property situation or other situations that might be analogous in other business. Like sometimes there's subsidiaries in larger businesses with divisions where maybe you want to have, I'll use electrical contracting, for example. So I've got a client, they're decent size. They do jobs around the United States and they do 6 and 7 figure, 8 figure contracts. And so they might have different divisions. And so it might make sense to do the structure that I just described where you have a wholly owned subsidiary of the main company, but this one operates on large industrial. This one just does data centers. This one just does residential. This one does solar and environmental stuff. And so by having these different divisions, it's easier to track how profitable different lines of business are and stuff because they have separate accounting and maybe bank accounts, but they all roll up and you just do one tax return at the holding company level. So that's a
I
situation where it might make sense too.
I didn't know about that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. It's an interesting world out there.
Yeah. Well, and I think yeah, unfortunately, we live in a world where anybody can sue anyone for any reason. And,
Yeah.
unless you can get dismissed on summary judgment, yeah,
And
you,
good luck on that because judges don't like to dismiss things on summary judgment. They, if they don't dismiss it on summary judgment, they cannot get overturned for that decision. But if they do dismiss it on summary judgment, they can get overturned if the side that got dismissed can say, actually, we had a shred of evidence, and if we had gone to trial, we might have won. So it's really
so it looks
difficult.
bad on their record.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that.
Oh yeah, judges think about their record regularly. I mean, take family court, in family court a lot of times a lot of hearings are done without any court reporter and in some other civil courts as well, but then there's less stuff on the record for the judge to have that can be overturned, right? Then it's just what were the things that were submitted, you know and filed and accepted by the court's clerk, and what was the final judgment, and maybe the actual trial has a court reporter, but outside of that the rest of the hearings, and you might have a dozen hearings before trial, might have no court reporter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things I've noticed about, and I'll say I see it at large law firms. I haven't seen it at small law firms, but I call you guys pack animals. You always travel in packs. You show up at a meeting, there's like three lawyers there, and and that would be a small meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I had a friend that joked that he gave a $5,000 uh, retainer to one of those large downtown law firms you're talking about. And every time he was on the phone, there was three or four people. And after three or four phone calls, the whole retainer was gone, and they hadn't even done anything yet.
Yeah.
You know,
I got pulled into a lawsuit when I first moved to Austin. The lawsuit was already underway, and they pulled me in as a professional witness. And it included IP theft and stuff like that. I got on a call prepping, just and there were a minimum of like five, six, seven lawyers on the phone, and one of them,
expensive call.
yeah, yeah, and one of them was an attorney that was involved in the intermittent wiper case that where Ford ripped off somebody's IP on intermittent wipers. It's like a very famous, very lucrative case. So his billable hours were pretty high.
Yeah.
And yeah, and we spent hour and a half, 2 hours with them asking me questions. And then they had deposition prep for me, and then I got deposed. And they never pulled me into the court. They never pulled me in the court or put me on the stand. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars just gone.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes in those situations, it's a strategic decision. I don't do as much litigation, but I've done a couple of cases. In one, for example, we thought about having experts. We ended up not having any, but it was an interesting situation because it's almost like an escalation game. If the other side designates an expert, you almost have to get an expert because if you're going to a jury or if you're going to a judge who doesn't know about that specific area of the world, and this one expert says this is the way it is, if you don't have somebody on your side that's an expert, that can say, nope, this is also some other things you need to think about, then that could sink your case. And so sometimes it's an escalation game where, like, I don't know if this is the case, but if you were the rebuttal expert, they had you in their back pocket in case the other side decided to put their witness forward, but they never did, so they never needed and that may have been the case. I don't know. But
Yeah. That's yeah, I think my favorite IP theft case was there was a British photographer that went to Indonesia and took a picture of a monkey, or is actually technically a macaw, but looked like a monkey. And or he was taking photos. He dropped his camera. The monkey picked up the camera, took the picture, and it was like this awesome picture. Took a selfie, and so he started selling the selfie of the monkey. He was British. The picture was taken in Indonesia. In the United States, PETA sued him for copyright infringement, representing the monkey. Because according to copyright law, the art belongs to whoever snapped the picture.
who? Please tell me PETA lost.
PETA won. I think they've since made some changes to that, but yeah,
Wow.
they successfully argued that it was the monkey's intellectual property and the photographer had not received permission from the monkey to use it.
Yeah, it's interesting the kinds of rights that they'll give to certain segments of living things and not other segments of living things.
Yeah. But kind of going back to that law firm that I ran into. So it was Fulbright Jaworski was our counsel. And my first encounter with one of their members, that company had been recruiting me for a couple of years. And when I finally said yes, I was like, well, hey, I have a non-compete. And I hired an attorney on my side and said, last step is you just have to make my attorney say yes, turn in your resignation, go take the job.
Oh
And
yeah,
and
how'd
so
that go?
well, it was really fascinating. And the company that was hiring me put a guy named Brian Gregg on the case. And Brian's a he was a very senior partner in Fulbright Jaworski and apparently a national expert in employment law. And he had so much finesse. He had so much finesse because I'm on a call with him and my attorney. And I hear him say to my attorney, he's like, hey, if I hear what you're saying right, you're saying that there's no severability clause in North Carolina employment contracts. So if part of the contract's invalid, the whole thing's invalid. Is that what you're telling me? My attorney hadn't said jack about that, or if he did, it went by so fast.
Yeah.
My attorney was like, "Oh yeah, that's right. That's right." And the thing that I really admired was the way Brian navigated that case. He made sure that my attorney didn't come out looking like an idiot while basically architecting the strategy to bring me over to the new company.
Yeah. Yeah. Finesse is an interesting thing. I think some attorneys are better at that and some are worse. It sounds like he was great. Like, I've definitely had attorneys on the other side that are just straight bulldogs. They get a position, they latch on, and they are just not letting go of it. And for me, since I'm not in litigation world as much, most of the attorneys I'm dealing with, I feel like at least have some, but I definitely feel like that's a strength for me. Like I've had a situation where, like recently, I've got a couple of different business owners that have a transaction. They're selling the business, and it's going to be for tens of millions of dollars, and they are very different in terms of their personality styles. And so one of them is going, "Hey, we need to close this, next week, tomorrow if possible, trying to time everything just right." And the other one is a little more like, "No, let's make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's." And there are some other little features within the deal also that can cause some conflict between the two of them, because even though they've done business together for a long time, they're very different. And so they those situations, you go into them, and I have I even have a colleague that's an attorney, and he's like, I can't do that the way that you do it. I would just say, here's the truth, about whatever. Like, you're different this way, you're different this way, and this is what we need to do. And I'm like, no, I just sometimes you just stick to your lane a little bit. You notice what other people are doing, and you adjust what you're doing, but you just try to guide them through and go, I'm not going to force your hand right now. I'm going to let you see where we're going. And I understand, this is a point of consternation for you, or this is a point of consternation for you over here. But rather than forcing people's hands, especially when you're trying to get a deal done, I find don't force the person's hand until you absolutely have to, and try to butter up the conversation ahead of time. I don't mean butter up in terms of flattery, but prime the conversation is maybe a better way to put it. You prime the conversation ahead of time by broaching the subject multiple times and laying out some facts without confronting either side. So you let those facts marinate and
Yeah.
you let the situation marinate. And so then when you're having that conversation the fifth or sixth time, that's marinated. You've kind of finessed it through several times without confronting them. And now when you finally turn and go, hey, we need a commitment at this point. If this is really going to be an issue, we're not going to be able to do this. So what do you need to do to make peace with this situation, or what do we need to change? And then they usually will come up with a pretty logical and rational answer, because they've been able to marinate on it and kind of make peace instead of coming in strong. So if somebody comes and strong arms them, they feel like they're being forced or backed into a corner. That doesn't go well. And my colleague has, I think, had a couple of times where he's probably done that, not trying to force them into a corner, but then they feel that way and they don't react well to him. And he's like, I don't know how you're doing that, man. And for me, I feel like that's definitely a strength in terms of just trying to build some rapport and build some trust as you're going through the process.
Well, in marketing, the way I put it is I talk about autonomy. Whenever because a lot of marketers sit there and they try to box you into a corner. A lot of salespeople will try to do that. And I believe they can be successful in the short term, but not in the long term. And because people hate having their autonomy taken away. And I found that
Yeah.
I can get more lasting agreement if I focus on preserving somebody's autonomy
Yeah.
and have
100%.
the more they think it's their idea, the longer the agreement lasts.
Yeah. And even if, sometimes in the course of a deal, it may be that I'm actually not, it may be, I'm probably not as wise as the guy that you just described that was from Fulbright and Jaworski, who can really make it seem like somebody else's idea. I've not mastered that concept yet. But even if you can't quite make it seem like it's their idea, if you can let them come to the conclusions themselves instead of forcing them to agree with you, that also goes a long way, because they feel like they were allowed their dignity, their autonomy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and something you said, I remember another time, this was down here in Austin. I was the president of my HOA, and we decided to, the board voted to sue the water utility that serviced our neighborhood. I voted against, but I lost the vote, and because I was president, it was my job to execute it. And so I had to go get an attorney. And there was one guy who was familiar with us. He saw members of our community down in City Hall, down at annual meetings or weekly meetings or monthly meetings, whatever it was. And they were
Yeah.
always troublemakers. And so when he responded to me, he's like, "Oh, I'm not sure I have time to take on this case, but there's somebody in my firm that I think would do a fine job." And I said, "Well, why don't we meet?" And so we met. And the more I think about it, I think he orchestrated it this way. The guy he was introducing me to just kept talking about, "Oh yeah, we're going to sue him. We're going to put him up against the wall. We're just going to, we're going to stick it to him." And so I sat there and I listened, and the meeting ended, and I called the attorney back and I said, "Well, I really appreciate you introducing me to this fella. He seems like he wants to fight. I don't want to fight. I want to settle. I want to get this resolved quickly and effectively." And he's like, "All right, I'll represent you." And I think he had done that just to figure out, one, I
Yeah.
don't think he wanted to be a bulldog. I don't think that's who he was.
Yeah.
But I think he was trying to figure out if I wanted to be if I was looking for a bulldog or if I was looking for somebody who could quickly settle.
Yeah, I think that compatibility is huge because, like, I'm not a bulldog. I think you can tell from some of my comments already. And I think anybody in any situation, whether they are going into litigation or they're doing a transaction or something else, it's really important to hire advisors that you trust and are in alignment with what you're trying to do and the way you're trying to go about it. And I've found that generally generates the best results for people because if you had wanted a bulldog and you'd hired him, you would have been frustrated with the pace of things because he'd be trying to settle and trying to give them a chance maybe and do this or that. And then on the flip side, if you had hired the bulldog, even though you didn't want to because you went, well, he introduced me to this guy, so that's who I'm going with, you might have been frustrated with the amount of legal fees you would have paid going through a lawsuit instead of settling. And so, in both cases, making sure you have the right fit's important and having that trust and rapport is important.
Yeah. Well, and if I go back to the attorney that I hired when I was leaving the other company and wanted him to sort out my contract, it was really funny. We got to the point where we got agreement, and I put in my resignation. I gave him a 3 week notice and a transition plan, and we were
Yeah.
executing on the transition plan. And one day, of course, I'd lost my, free range privileges, so I had to show up in the lobby and wait for somebody to escort me to whatever meeting I was going to.
Yeah.
And I'm waiting in the lobby, and one of the general managers from a different division starts walking through the lobby, sees me, crosses way out of his path, comes up to me and said, "Why did you go to them?" And he faked a punch to my face. He stopped literally like inches from my nose. And I was furious. I went ahead and had my meeting. I got back to my house later that day and I drafted a letter. I can write something, I can write reasonable legalese. And I drafted something and I passed it over to my attorney, who was a master. I watched what he did. He was handling me. I knew he was handling me, but he was doing it so well. I appreciate it. And he asked me what happened, and I told him, and he's like, "Well, Craig, I read your letter." He said, "It's really good. It's really good. If I didn't know, I'd think a lawyer wrote it." And he told me, "So when we first talked, you said you wanted to leave kicking up as little dust as possible. You just wanted to be a smooth, pleasant thing." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Is that still the case?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I tell you what, let me draft a letter for you." He said, "We're going to get you out of there. You're going to walk in that building exactly one more time, and it's to drop off the letter that I'm going to give you." And, because it's at will, you don't have to honor your 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And, and so, yeah, I appreciated that because he wrote a much nicer letter than mine that
Yeah.
very nicely said, "We're done."
Yeah.
And it was funny. I had a
We were
meeting.
trying to be nice, but we're done.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was funny. I had a meeting with my boss that morning, my direct boss, and I called him and I said, "Hey, I'm not going to meet you at the office. I'll meet you at Panera Bread." And he's like, "Do you still work for me?" I said, "Not really." I said, "I'll tell you, I'll fill you in on that." And so we sat down and I told him what happened, and we chatted. And because my goal wasn't to kick up any dust. I wasn't trying to hurt that company.
Yeah. But at the
But
same time, you're not going to suffer through more incidents like that one because they didn't have good discretion.
yeah, yeah, I mean, that was completely inappropriate. I had something in my letter about a dangerous work environment, which of course that's actionable. If somebody reports a dangerous work environment and the company doesn't do anything, that's actionable. And that was one of the things that my attorney said, we probably shouldn't go there. It may be true, but that's not a bridge you want to cross.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
But no, it ties in with what you're saying. It's really about finding, the advisors that you can trust. And I've been blessed that I've dealt with a lot of attorneys, except I think Fulbright Jaworski made a ton of money getting in a stupid lawsuit and should have
Sure.
talked
Stupid
somebody out.
lawsuits make lawyers lots of money. And the lawyers will acknowledge it's a stupid lawsuit. They're like, look, like if you guys would settle or if the other side would settle, we wouldn't have to do this, but we're going to do our job.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I've been blessed. Most of the attorneys I've run into, they fit my temperament. I have no desire, you know, to win big legal battles. I'm just like, it's just life's too short to fight the big fights. You focus on the important ones and find ways to kind of settle and settle while holding on to what's important.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like you said, being able to trust the advisors that you're working with is important. And if they're looking at the big picture the same way that you are, then that can help in those heated moments, whether it's somebody almost punching you in the face or a deal that is in a crunch period and some decisions have to be made. If you have somebody that you trust that's able to talk you through the situation, it's a lot, I think, better in terms of the results that you're going to get as opposed to just hiring somebody because they're high priced or because of something else. I'm sure we can both think of people that sometimes have more money than sense and they just want the biggest and best and brightest lawyer without necessarily thinking about that fit. And I think having that fit where there can be a trusted advisor is important.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, this has been amazing. Appreciate you coming on Layers and Legacies. How can people reach you?
Probably the easiest way is email or phone call. My email is aphillips at aphillipslawoffice.com, which is a mouthful. I know Phillips is with two L's there. Office numbers 817-903-1414. I'm also, I think, on LinkedIn. And yeah, you can always come stop by the Stockyards. I'm in the second floor in the Livestock Exchange building.
That would be awesome. I tell you what, next time I'm up there, I'll swing by. I'll let you know in advance. I won't pop in, but I'd love to
Please
swing by and
do.
check it out. Well, Aaron, thanks again for being on Layers and Legacies.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Good talking with you, Craig.